Thank you, Kelsey. Appreciate it, and thank you all for being here. Grateful for you guys taking the time to think that this is our our 17th signing day here at the University of St. Thomas is pretty awesome. So grateful to have you guys here and making the effort. And for those that are with us virtually, thank you for your time and effort too. Appreciate it. A lot's changed in 17 years. A lot hasn't changed in 17 years. I think as we transition to different leagues, to different levels, divisions, there are certainly some things that, especially in recruiting, might change a little bit, maybe the size of the player, the speed of the player. But what doesn't change, what goes all the way back to our first class 17 years ago, is very simply the idea of trying to get the right type of person to the University of St. Thomas, someone who understands certainly into football, right? I get that 100%, but that's only what connects us, right? From there, it's an opportunity to pick a place that's going to transform them and their future family. And give them some tools in their toolkit, not just academically, but most importantly for us as men in society to be great fathers and great husbands. So a day like today gives me a chance to say a few things to a few different groups, certainly to the players, our current players. I'm proud of you. I think the number one reason why someone feels a certain way about a school after you get over the superfluous stuff, the noise that's out there, and you get on campus, I think is how they relate to the players. And our players have always been very authentic, very genuine. They are who they are, and I love them for it. And they did an unbelievable job helping in this class. Certainly to the coaches, hats off. Our coaching staff works tirelessly to put together a game plan or to put together a recruiting class. And they have an unapologetic and unwavering obligation for our student athletes to always, always, always put the program first. That's selfless, that's thoughtful, and in my opinion, that's honorable. And for a staff that believes strongly in our job being educational at its core, I'm grateful for that. Certainly to the alumni and the fans out there, love to introduce you to some of our newest Tommies. And for today, probably most importantly to our new players, last but certainly not least, welcome. Happy to have you here at St. Thomas, and as I've said many times individually to you guys, we're going to get a lot of celebrations today and a lot of thank yous and congrats and all those types of things. But today is simply day one of having an opportunity of going on a pretty neat journey. So what I thought I would do, bless you, what I thought I would do is go through a quick PowerPoint. I have an overview, a couple different ways that the class breaks down, small snippet on each player. And then we'll certainly open it up to any questions that you guys have. So now keep in mind that there's two signing periods. If you don't know, this is the early signing period. For us in the early signing period, we targeted 20 players, 20 of the right players to be able to bring in. And the second signing period, which concludes at the beginning of February, we'll probably add somewhere in the neighborhood of 7 to 8 players in the class. For us, as we grow and learn how to do this best and most efficiently, that's the most thoughtful way as a coaching staff that we thought. So we'll talk about 20 players today in the early signing. There's 4 slides, I'll give you a few miscellaneous thoughts. There were 15 of the 20 that were actually camp evaluations. And our staff, when they go on the road and they start to evaluate these young men when they're almost a year ago now, a lot of it is trying to figure out if it's the right fit. And when I say the right fit, it's not just can he run this fast or jump this high, but how does he take coaching and how does he respond, both the coach and the player. So we had a lot of guys that were here at camp. We had 12 guys on this list that are multi-sport athletes. You know that's been a backbone of our recruiting for a long time. We believe firmly if given the opportunity. I know not everybody can. I know I wasn't athletic enough to play multiple sports, but I do know that a lot of these guys do, and I think it helps out tremendously. And by the time all is said and done with the recruiting process, the average number of visits for the 20 guys that we signed today is just over 3, slightly over 3. So I think that speaks to the power, not just of the location and the work that's done, but also the effort on the side of the families that are looking at a University of St. Thomas, and very grateful that they did. By location, in this 20, there's 8 from the state of Minnesota, 4 from Illinois, 4 from Wisconsin, 1 from Kansas, 1 from Iowa, Nebraska, and Arizona as well. And these numbers will all be available to you. Kelsey, I think, did a great job putting the papers together, so she'll be able to get any of these if I breeze by them. By academics, the average class GPA, extremely proud, is a 3.7. Again, this is an academic institution. I understand I'm a football coach, but we're educators first. And to be able to have guys that understand the balance that they can have here at St. Thomas, absolutely imperative. Top intended majors this year, it's eerily similar to the last 2 years, to be honest with you. So for those of you folks that were in the room before, in the class, business and engineering lead the number of majors of our incoming players. Pre-med and health sciences, rounded out by computer science, and there are still some that are undecided. And I think that's one of the benefits of a school like ours is you can be undecided, figure out what you want to do while you're at St. Thomas, and still be able to do what you need to on the field and get your degree in 4 years. By position, Kelsey alluded to it a little bit earlier, but on the offensive side, 4 offensive linemen, 1 tight end, 1 wide receiver, 2 running backs, and 2 quarterbacks. And on the defensive side, 3 defensive linemen, 2 inside backers, 2 outside backers. We'll talk about them collectively as linebackers, but they do split up that way. 2 defensive backs, and also a kicker and punter. So kickoffs and field goals, as well as punting as well. So if no one else ever minds, which they usually don't, I like to start with the offensive line. That's kind of what the program is built on. Hudson Cleary. Hudson Cleary is from Wisconsin, Middletown, Wisconsin. I'll do my best to try and describe, to draw maybe a comparison or two to a current player that we have. So for those of you that have covered or coach or play with the guys, you can get a better picture. As I do, please don't think that I'm saying he's just like him, because that is certainly not the case. But Hudson Cleary is a young and long and lean athlete that can play any one of the 5 positions on the offensive line. Very highly recruited, big frame, and at 255 pounds, very similar, not as tall as a Jason Laliberti, but his growth pattern that could come is pretty massive. Very good football player. Will begin his career at the tackle position, and really good at playing to the ground. We had him in camp. Kyle Felt, a bit of a late bloomer in Kyle, and for that reason we were a little bit later on him. Baraboo, it's our first player from Baraboo High School in Wisconsin, central Wisconsin, down near Wisconsin Dells. The thing that routinely, pleasantly surprises me about a guy like Kyle is, although he's not a wrestler, he finishes all the way to the ground a higher percentage of any guy that we will look at on film. And that speaks to not just his athleticism, but his effort and also the ability to move his hips with him too. Aiden Harrell. Aiden's from right down the road at Prior Lake High School, a massive man, and one of the most highly recruited guys that we've probably had to go against in the last couple of years. Similar in some ways, I would say, to a Marcus Johnson. Marcus came in and had a fantastic freshman year playing for us at tackle this past season, but a big guy, and he's probably a touch over 6'4", but 330 will give Coach Haugen and Dell and the strength staff a lot to work with for sure. He's a guy who can play 4 different positions on the offensive line, probably start him out at guard and go from there. But he was a guy that when he started to be all into St. Thomas, it went really, really quick. Had him in camp, did a lot of evaluations on him. Hey, Ryan. Did a lot of evaluations on him. And by the time he came to campus, I think for the Butler game, for homecoming, he had committed. So it was really awesome. Ethan Sims. So Ethan is a guy who I think, when I say some things stay the same, some things change, Ethan's a microcosm of it, certainly bigger, probably at least 6'6", if not 6'6 and a half. But much like an Alec Rasmussen, I think chose this school in the right ways for the right reasons. Business major, local, understands what St. Thomas might be able to provide him and his future family, and is very much into the balance, as most of our guys are, the balance of, I want to play great football, I want to be in a great culture in the locker room, but I don't want to have to sacrifice or mitigate or marginalize my education because of it. And Ethan was a guy who we were able to get mid-season as well. Could have gone just about anywhere he wanted to, and grateful that he's a Tommie. Tight ends, so as I said, there's still some that, there's going to be 7 or 8 that are not in this early signing, would be my guess. But Will Lefker was a guy who we felt very strongly about. We wanted in the early signing. He's a Dowling Catholic High School guy down in Des Moines. 6'3", 230 pounds. He can do a lot of different things. So sometimes, maybe like a Patrick Wagner a little bit, he presents like a traditional tight end at the point of attack with his hand in the ground. But he also moves around a lot and is able to athletically play a lot of different spots, whether that's a wing, a backside inline, out in the slot as a wide receiver, and just tremendously athletic. Running back, Mark Koisel. We had to wait on Mark. Predominantly, our coaches are very disciplined, and I am grateful for that, because sometimes you might have to wait for all the other FBS offers that are already out to these guys to maybe come and go or to compete against them. And Mark was one of those guys out of Marist Catholic Prep down in Chicago. It's been a school that has been very good to us, not just at St. Thomas, but throughout our career. And Mark is a big back, a really big back. He's all of 6'2", 210 pounds. But he understood who St. Thomas was, I think, because our coaches were there at the beginning with him. We're very upfront with him. Also has family ties to the school. And absolutely grateful that we get a chance to play a guy like Mark. Mark can play the tailback, he can play the combo back, he can play the one back. He's a multi-tool 3-down back. And in our offense, maybe 4-down back, who knows. Joseph Cook, excuse me. So Joe is interesting. Came off an injury, and I think maybe we had a chance to take a look at him where maybe some other schools didn't necessarily stay with him. From Menominee Falls, which is southeastern Wisconsin, but very diverse and dynamic in his skill sets. Very. So certainly can play the traditional tailback spot, but also can go out in the slot and play the wide receiver spot. Coach Kabaki did an amazing job just making sure that he stayed with him the entire time, and he was one of the guys that got on board early. Wide receivers. So Quentin he's from Woodbury. Okay, Quentin came to camp and wowed a lot of us. Not just with what he did at camp, but how he carried himself. He's a really neat young man, truly is. And worldly and thoughtful and tough and great smile. And so we had waited a little bit and we said, well, let's see what the senior year film looks like. And after about 3 games into the season, Coach K goes, Wally Kaczynski said he had another 300-yard game, 3 games into the season, returning back-to-back kickoff returns for touchdowns. Is this the time? Is that good enough film? We said, yes, that's good enough film. And small for sure, but explosive and the type of guy that you would want. He is an athlete by category, so could go to a couple of different spots. But the most natural spot would be as a wide receiver. Quarterback. So before we get to the quarterbacks, I will say a very, very intentional recruiting process on our end. Our coaches looked at a little bit over 100 quarterbacks very intently. Both of the quarterbacks that we have in this class were 2 of those 15 that I said came to camp. And I can't impress upon you enough the importance of being able to coach a young man who's in camp. One of those was a camper that found us when he was a sophomore and kept coming back. So Coach Landry, the offensive staff, and the whole recruiting operations group, I think fantastic with how direct they were at what they wanted. Ryan Jackson. So Ryan, first thing that's going to pop out to you is that he's shorter, right? He's 5'10". Ryan Jackson was the first team All-State Illinois Player of the Year. He set the record for career touchdowns, breaking the quarterback who's now playing at Northwestern. He had 55 career touchdowns. He is dynamic. He can get in and out. I shouldn't say he can get into trouble. He can get out of trouble really quickly, but he has a really nice demeanor of being able to keep his eyes downfield and just very explosive when he has to run. For some of you folks that have been around here a long time, he might remind you of a different version of a Dakota Tracer or a Johnny Gould in that vein. Uber competitive kid. And he's one that when you watch his film, it jumps out at you. And he has undeniable numbers, but that's not why you necessarily take a guy to be a leader of an offense. He is a leader by nature, and Ryan is we're very excited to have him. Philip Jones, PJ Jones, he was the one I was alluding to, kind of found us a couple years ago, came to camp after his sophomore year, and then came back, and our coaching staff just fell in love with him. Tremendously dynamic, well-raised young man who, the whole world is right at his feet. He takes care of it in the classroom, he takes care of it on the field. He's the best leader in his locker room, and he's a guy who, when he's here, the moments aren't too big for him, even if it's a competitive camp situation. One of the things that we learned last year is our guys handle moments that aren't too big for him, and I think that speaks to the type of young man who usually has success here, and how well balanced they are. But PJ Jones, he's coming from Arizona, Mesquite School in Phoenix area. Defensive line, now you guys know we're a three-man front, right? And so going into this early signing, the goal was to find three, even though we might add one down the road. I think specifically the last couple years, we've done tremendously well with the guys that were here and are still here and how they play the defensive line spot. I think we've learned a lot about what those guys look like in high school. And now we have a few data points of what the longer bodies or the different skill sets might present like when they get to game day. Rocco DiLeonardi, and yes, I know that you're gonna love his name. Rocco was out of Geneva, really good high school, amazing leader. He's been on campus 4 times already, and he's an infectious personality. He plays that same way, like he plays the game the way it's intended to be played, with great effort, great hustle. He's still, I would say, a little on the skinnier side at 220 pounds. He might be 225 pounds right now. But when I think about what I was just saying a minute ago, the young men who come in, what their game looks like and how they're able to grow in 2 or 3 years, he has absolutely all the pieces. Great job. Teddy Knapp, so Teddy's a guy, local product. So he's 6'4", he might be 6'4 and a half. The thing that jumped out at us is his wingspan's almost 7 feet, right? He was in everybody's backfield this year. And, truth be told, I've watched his growth because he's played with our kids for the last 10 years. And to see him start to mature into the player, he was a true two-way player on a very, very good St. Thomas Academy team, coached by one of our former coaches, Travis Welch. Played the tight end spot and dominated, especially down the stretch. And like I said, was just a disruptor in the backfield, and still a very, very young body. Extremely excited to have a guy like Teddy Knapp on the edge for us. And Aiden Teppering, Aiden's from right over the river in Wisconsin, was our second commit very early in the process. Felt strongly that this was the type of school for him, I believe, first, and certainly the type of football program he was looking for. But Aiden's a guy who now in the 6-state region, we have a little over 100 high schools that would run our systems that we know of, our systems on offense or defense. And I think for being in one area, one spot for a long period of time, that really helps, because we know that when someone is playing in that system, it's the translation to what we're going to ask him to do is usually pretty good. And he played a stand-up outside. He played with his hand on the ground. Again, you're gonna see that and hear that a lot, guys that have played different positions, because in high school, quite often, you put your best guy or one of your better guys where you need him that week, or maybe where you need him that year. And very dynamic guy. A great example of, you see some of these schools that are on the bottom that have the same name of the guys that are on the roster. I think one of the best things about trying to recruit a school like that is they know a guy who is a year or two older than them, like Evan Tyler, and played in the system, was in the same locker room. They know how good these people are as young men, and that's what I think led him to St. Thomas. Linebacker, just going to go through, like I said 10 minutes ago, going to go through all 4. But Charlie Byrne, Charlie is a massive, massive guy, and I honestly, those numbers are from going into his senior year, but he is a huge dude that can play on the edge for us. And, just walking over here, talking to Coach K, when you do things differently than other teams do them, or the systems are a little bit different, there's pros and cons to that, right? Certainly the pro is that if you can find a system that plays the way you do, that might be unique and that learning curve might be small. But also there's not every high school has stand-up outside linebackers. Not every high school has a fullback. Almost no high schools have tight ends, right? Like it's rare nowadays. And so when you can find those guys that do those, again, playing in the same exact system that our coaches installed at that school years and years ago, tremendously explosive, dynamic guy, much like maybe a Caleb Sandstrom would have been for us this past year. Teron Blasi, Teron's when I think of Teron, I think leader first. He was here on our very first recruiting day, and before we can get 30 seconds into a conversation back in February, he wanted to talk leadership. That's all he wanted to talk, and motivation and leadership and being a part of something greater than you could be on your own. So right away, you say that's a guy that fits in our locker room for sure. Comes to camp, has a great camp, has a fantastic season. And he'll be playing the inside linebacker spot for us. Extremely happy to have him from right down the road at Park High School. Roman Johnson was different, though. So Roman was not a guy that played the traditional linebacker spot. He's a guy that when he came to camp, the coaches said, you know what, I know what you're coming to camp for positionally, but I do believe that we should flip you over and take a look in a different mode. And just competitive, uber competitive kid with a great disposition and can really run for a guy who's approaching 200 pounds, and he'll be playing inside linebacker for us from Minnetonka High School right down the road. Walker Owens, probably one of our top 5 highly recruited guys in terms of number of Division I offers or opportunities that he had at other places. Walker's the outside linebacker on the other side, and cut and paste what I said 2 minutes ago with how difficult it is to sometimes find the guys that fit the system, but when you do, you feel really good about it. Walker came on campus, and he was a guy who wasn't on campus 4 times. But as soon as he came on campus, he would tell you it clicked pretty good. And I think that's a testament to the players more than anything else. Very, very high academics, serious about his education, understands what he wants out of life, and a very focused young man. Really good football player out of Wheaton North High School. A year ago, I stood in here, a year and a day ago, I stood in here, and I said, we've got to get more out of Illinois. And that was, you can't just say it and then take whomever, because then there might be issues down the road if you don't get the right person for whatever reason. And I think the focus on being able to get the right players from the Chicagoland area, it was a directive, but most importantly, it came to fruition. And he's certainly one of them. Defensive back, so a couple guys. Anthony Lonergan is from Kansas, and he's a Blue Valley High School guy. Anthony is a guy who probably knows our culture and believes our culture of mental toughness, selflessness, thoughtfulness, leadership as good as anybody. And before we can even get into the football piece of it, he was all in from the jump, him and his family. And once again, I think one of the reasons why our sustainability has been what it is because we have enough of those guys on the team that come in understanding what those core principles are and how they should be carried out. And he's certainly one of them. We'll be playing him at the defensive back spot. Big kid. If you watched us play this year, you probably noticed, guys like Nick Hand and Ryan Calcagno. I mean, these are longer safeties than you've probably seen in years past, 6'2", 6'3", 6'4", 6'5". And what we can do with those types of players, as long as they're willing to understand what's important at the time, is pretty massive. So Anthony will be playing the defensive back spot. And Ty Nielsen. Ty's from Elkhorn, an area that, even though it might not be as popular, it's not as populous as Chicagoland. We know that. It's Nebraska, right outside of Omaha. But it's also an area where the staff, we have staff that we're fortunate enough that they've been here for a long time, and they have connections in these semi-immediate areas, like in Omaha. Omaha is now, Tyler is our fourth guy in the last 3 years from that area when we didn't have one before we ended up making the transition. And that area has been really, really good for us, guys like Gavin Nunnally, guys like Matt Rink. And Coach went down there and I think found the right type of young man. And last, and then we'll open it up for questions, kicker punter. So Ben Hoyland was our very first commit. Very, very early over in the summer. Local product from Mounds View High School. He was a guy that Coach Lichtenberger actually saw at a different camp, and I won't say who, but a big camp, and won that camp's competition as a kicker, and came in and said, hey, I really think we should get him over here and take a look at him. We said, okay, and it was within a week. It was a pretty good connection. He is a three-tool guy, so that means if you watch us play this year, not always do you get someone that kicks and punts, and sometimes you get someone who kicks, but they might kick off and they might not do field goals, right? The goal is to find guys that are capable at least to be a backup at each, if not a starter at each, and he is a true three-tool guy in the kicking game. High-end academic kid who believes that if I want to raise my family in this area, why wouldn't I want a degree from the University of St. Thomas? I said I couldn't have said better myself, so I'll probably use that in recruiting. So that's the class of 24 in general. If you don't mind, can we just open it up for questions? And let me preface it by saying, if you want, I'm in no rush to get out of here, so if anyone needs to do an individual interview, myself and our staff will certainly be available for that afterwards if you want, and we can provide film links and other things that go with it. Questions? Excuse me, Dean.
You lost a couple of key linebackers in the portal. Did that affect what you did here recruiting-wise, and also any of these guys going to play right away?
There's a lot in there, right? So the biggest loss in our linebacking crew was the fact that we have about 3,000 reps that graduated, right? So both of the linebackers, both inside linebackers, Tommy Shellstead and Jack Moeller, those guys, I mean, they were pre-COVID players for us when they were freshmen, right? So that's a lot of reps that we graduate. And certainly guys that we brought in might have been bigger or a step faster, but they were unbelievable football players. So that is, I'm not going to ignore, that's a pretty massive hole, but that's our job, is to graduate guys and move them on. Could some of these guys come in and play? Sure. I'll just give you the numbers. Rather than guess or give you my personal opinion, I'll just tell you what the numbers are. The average class that we brought in, each of the last, so this being the fourth year, okay, of recruiting towards Division I. The first year we weren't in it, and we were recruiting towards it, right? The average is between 27 and 28 players, okay? It's 27.2 or something, 27 and a quarter. And that's why I say, well, in the next period, we'll add 7 or 8. Of those, about half of those will play as freshmen. So there are guys present in a lot of different ways. There are those guys like Caleb Sandstrom last year and Eli Paulson that came in and were prepared to play and did play, and we played them in 4 games and they still retained their red shirt, and we didn't have to play them necessarily in more than 4 games, although added massive value. About half of the group is going to be in that boat where they can find a way to get into the 2.5 deep and play. Of those in a given year, there will be between 6 and 8 in each of the first 3 classes, 6, 7, or 8 guys of those 27 or 28 that will simply not redshirt and play in all 11 or 12 games, whatever it might be. Those would be guys last year like Tate Tioka or Elliot Hitter or some of those guys. Or if you want to go back, those are the guys like Alec Rasmussen or Shea Albrecht. I wouldn't think, Dean, that this year is going to be much different, although I will say, even though the number of guys who are coming in and actually play right away stayed consistent, the better our team gets, the deeper our team gets. That number might have started at 9 and trended down to 5 or 6, so it could be a little bit less than that. Other questions?
Glenn, you have 3 quarterbacks, and now you're bringing in 2 more. Do you still have the other 3?
Sir, we do. It's a philosophical choice to bring in 5 quarterbacks, and been doing this for going on 28 years now. And every great quarterback that we've ever had, no matter where we've been, no matter who the quarterbacks were, they competed. They're high-end competitors. And I know a lot of schools would say, you know what, I want to bring in 3 or 4. If you look at the NFL right now, not to say that it's directly correlated, but there are more backup quarterbacks playing right now in the NFL than ever in the history. And there's more third-string quarterbacks playing on rosters than ever in the history. And there's more quarterbacks that are playing that weren't on that team's roster in the last year, right? So it's a physical sport, and what we don't want to do is be in a situation where we cut it razor thin and look at last year. And then there's an injury, and now you're trying to play or practice with 2 guys or 3 guys. But that is absolutely a philosophical decision by our entire staff, and it hasn't changed, to do our best to bring in 2 quarterbacks the majority of the years. And sometimes your quarterback comes in and Takte Tioka is eventually ready to learn the system. He wasn't ready on day 1, but he became ready. And sometimes that quarterback, although probably not in this case, the case this year, ends up being a guy like Brandon Smith, and he's your best corner. And if you can move a good athlete who's a good competitor to a different spot, that's been a track record that we've had some success with. So
That would seem to be a position where it's easy to be discouraged, or if you find yourself as number 4.
I think it's true, and simply because it's a singular, not simply because, it is a singular position. So the more that there are singular positions, I think the more that's likely. But also because, I mean, I don't know how many of you guys coached football or coached anything, but if you coach football and you go talk to someone who's not intimately watching your program, okay, but knows what you're doing, the first question that they're going to ask, always, is how you guys going to be next year? Do you know what the second question is, Pat? Who's your quarterback for next year? That's question number 2, right? And it's just, there's a lot of focus that ends up being on that position. So it could be, I think our staff, we develop every single young man who comes in this program. I go back to, we've had quarterbacks that have come in here and started right away, like started their first game before classes started, because classes started on a Wednesday and our first game was on a Saturday. That can happen. And he's an All-American. There's also quarterbacks that are offensive players of the year that had to wait till their 5th year. A guy like Alex Fensky. And he waits his time for his opportunity, starts 1 year, and he's one of the best that we've ever had, throwing for 3,000 yards and gosh knows how many touchdowns. So that adage of let us then be up and doing with a heart for any fate, still achieving, still pursuing, learn to labor and to wait, that Longfellow quote matters more at a position like quarterback, because if you're willing to labor, then we're willing to develop you, and that's what we've had a pretty good track record with. But yes, all 3 are still with us, and we'll go into fall camp with 5. Yes, sir.
Is Quinton Cobb Butler in the running for possibly starting as wide receiver next season?
Coach talk. Everybody's in the running for starting next season, right? I mean, truth be told, right? I will tell you this. He's no different than any other one of the guys in that manner. The skill set, and probably, correct me if I'm wrong, coaches, but the skill set that he presented right away was as a punt and a kick returner, and it jumps off the screen at you. As much as I would like to say, oh, you kids can come in and plug and play him on an offense or defensive position right away, reality is that a lot of the young guys, these are 18-year-old guys that are going up against, 22, 23-year-old men. A lot of them start to flash and present first on special teams. It wouldn't shock me if that's a situation. But he is a true two-tooled returner. And you might say, what's the difference? There's a lot of people that can be good kick returners because of the nature of lesser anxiety than a punt returner. Kick returner, If he were to drop a ball, he just bends over and picks it up and then he runs. It's not a big deal. You see it every Saturday and every Sunday throughout the fall. If a punt returner drops the ball, that's probably a game-changing play, and he certainly presents as a punt returner first.
Glenn,
Yes, sir.
D3,
Mhm.
you had commitments, but you didn't have anybody sign anything. They had to get mom and dad to write out the check in January, or whatever it was. Is this, I mean, it's obviously more competitive, but is it nice to have 20
Oh.
signed compared to the old days?
Yes, sir.
100% sure.
No doubt. And the simple fact that we don't have to bring in a class of 42 guys, that we can focus on lesser numbers, more time, growth, and development. And that's not just football. 5 years ago, it would have been very difficult to have each of our players sit down with their position coach every week and go through the things that have nothing to do with football. How's school going? How's home? Is there anything that you need in terms of support, right? To me, the number, the 110 that we are at and the 27, 28 we bring in speaks directly to the type of hands-on relationship that we can have, even more so. And it's not like we didn't try before, we tried intently, but it's just numbers. So yeah, to be able to go into Christmas knowing that 75% of your class is taken care of is it's going to make it a happier Christmas, for sure.
Is there an area or two that you're going to focus on in the second February?
For sure. That's an awesome question. Not to say the other ones aren't, but that's one that's on our minds routinely. So if you remember a year and a day ago in this room, we had either 0 or 1 defensive lineman at that time. And we ended up bringing in 3 defensive linemen. A lot of it is not what we want. A lot of it is, for lack of a better term, what the market bears and what's out there. So for right now, like last year it was defensive line, right now it seems to be a large delay in the offensive skill category. But certainly we'll absolutely focus on a couple spots. There are some that we don't have to focus on, but that doesn't mean that if we find a really good fit and a really good player, we wouldn't take them. But we don't have to spend the majority of our time this year on defensive line, right? We definitely are going to want to find another tight end or another receiver. Corner is going to be one of those other ones that's certainly we're going to take a look at. Corner and slot nickel, for sure.
When those 7 or 8 guys you're going to bring in later, do you anticipate getting anyone from the transfer portal?
I do. Won't talk in depth about them today, but there will be, much like we've had for the last better part of 2 decades, I suppose, there seem to be 2 or 3 guys, maybe 4 in a specific year, and that's what hasn't changed, right? When you get a guy like Johnson Fala, who is every bit what that locker room is about, or Matthew Gugamos, or some of those guys, you know that it's because they're transferring for the right reasons and you have a pre-existing relationship. Maybe you recruited him and we lost him several years ago. So there will be a couple, but not an influx.
You lost 2 kids so far to the portal that signed with scholarship programs.
Mm-hmm.
You a little surprised this hasn't happened sooner?
No, I mean, the portal's not a new situation. It's not new to us. It's not new to college football. It's been going on the last several years. It might be a hot topic or something that's new to the people that aren't involved in it every day. But no, I mean, every situation is different. There's a lot of different reasons. I mean, history will show us, the portal doesn't necessarily mean transfer, right? Sometimes it certainly does. Sometimes it means the person is a graduate student and he crossed that hurdle and he wants to go look at a program at a different school. Sometimes, frankly, he's just done with his career and it's a fancier way to quit. There's a lot of different reasons why people would be in there, but it's not new to us. It's something that I think a lot more people are just paying attention to. It's something we've worked through and dealt with for several years.
The reason I ask is because there could be an economic expensive, you know, mom and dad have to write big checks even if the kids get financial aid.
Could be. Again, I mean, Pat, every situation is different. I wouldn't even validate the comment by saying yes or no. I mean, every situation is different when it comes to that. I will say one thing you can't negate is the simple fact that I mean, the stories that you are hearing, we would hear the same thing. I mean, it's crazy at, you know, not even talking necessarily a scholarship, but money that's afforded these guys, right? And one of the things that, I mean, this hasn't changed. I love our team because they focus on the team. Like I would tell them if someone quit, I would say, guys, there's no need to ignore anything, but there's also no need to dwell on anything. We focus on what we have in front of us. And I think one of the reasons why we've stayed the way we've stayed for the better part of 2 decades is probably because we have enough young men that understand that we can only control what we can control. And they're going to put all their effort and all their thoughtfulness and all their selflessness into that. And that's a hallmark of ours, I would say, and that's not changing. Other questions?
When do you get your schedule for your league, or do you already have it?
When do I get it or when do you get it? Boss, what do you think?
Mid-January.
That's for the league. You know you're not in conference already.
Some of we have an opportunity. Bless you. We have an opportunity of in the next 2 years playing an extra game because of how the calendar works. It happens twice every 7 years. But for the most part, the conference schedule, I will say, correct me if I'm wrong, please. But it's this. What are we in? You just finished year 3. So it's the same teams that we played this year, just flipped with where we are, home and home. But do not misconstrue that, because I made that comment 2 years ago, and it got all out of whack in terms of what day you play what team. They don't always fall on the same. Matter of fact, I would say they probably don't fall on the same day. So, you know, when you have a border-to-border, coast-to-coast league, certainly there's a lot of factors at play. So we play next year. We play every team in our league with the exception of Davidson and Presbyterian. Is that correct? Just like this year, just flipped.
You have Northern Iowa coming to town, though.
Yeah, excited. You know, that was one that we didn't sit in this room 3 years ago because we were all wearing masks and staying at home 3 years ago, right? But when this day came virtually 3 years ago, those were the guys we were talking about, Alec Rasmussen, and we were talking about, you know, all the guys from that first class that joined us, right? And that was one of their first college football games. It wasn't the first, but it was one of the first college football games. And I remember how proud I was at that moment, still can feel it very viscerally, of how hard our kids fought, even though we had a decidedly lesser athletic team or smaller team, whatever you want to say. And it's one of those games that we're grateful that you can return that game, get a home and home, but that there can be a little distance between that return. So for that reason, I think it's pretty unique, and I know it's going to be a point of excitement for sure. Yes, sir.
What role did the nutrition station have in recruiting the players?
Also an interesting question, right? That's a good question. I see Mr. Gallagher back there like, oh, it's a good question. It is a good question. Coaches, can you help me out on, do you think it had I don't know how you quantify it.
Cool.
Coach K says it's really cool, and he's right. I think it moved the needle. I don't know how, other than that I can say it. What I do think it shows is this. There's the obvious benefit of having something like that in an athletic department, right? But what it signals to these young men and women that are being recruited here is that there is a growth and a process to grow the individual in a way that you simply can't. And I mean, it's not easy to just say, was it easy, Jamal, to just say, oh, let's put it, no. Matter of fact, it took a little while to do it, right? But I think that's when people say, why are you so sure? Question we had to answer more 2 years ago than now, but why are you so sure? It's because of the confluence of the amount of people that are trying to just get a little bit better. And sometimes you see those things, and sometimes you don't see those things. But there's a constant movement to try and get a little bit better, and that was certainly one of the big things in the last year, I suppose.
Well, you're screaming at the TV when they called that a charge, a block and not a charge in Johnny's game in the last minute. Look at
So,
sideline there.
full disclosure, I was recruiting,
Oh, okay.
and I didn't get a chance to see the whole thing. I will say for Coach Tower and the entire team, I mean, that's what a culture does. They come together in moments where it might seem dire, and I'm not talking about the end of the game, I'm talking about playing a really good opponent. And if you think that on the field success, or on the court, or on the whatever it might be course, success is limited to this program, you're wrong, because you can see the growth in games like that, and very proud in general of how our young men played in that game. I said it 3 years ago, there's going to be a time where winning and success are synonymous. There is. We're not always there yet, and we have to find things that allow us to signal and mark that we're getting better as a department. That's one of them, for sure. I walked around that call that you asked a little bit. What other?
It was, but if it was an MIAC referee, it would have been a charge.
That quote is by Patrick Royce, not Glenn Caruso, nor endorsed by the University of St. Thomas. Other questions that you folks have? I'll finish with this. How the class like this pans out is always going to be told down the road. We want, like we do these recruiting days, and we want answers right now. That's not how life works. It certainly isn't how college football or recruiting works. What I'm proudest of is I think our coaches work tirelessly to find a group of young men that are willing to be thoughtful, that are willing to be selfless, that are willing to, at all costs, put the good of the team ahead of their own selfish wants, right? Needs over wants. How good the team is, I don't know. You're going to have to come back in another year or 2 years to tell how good this class is. And I'm not going to oversell it. I'm not going to undersell it. I'm just going to tell you stoically what it is. And then tomorrow, just like I told every single one of those guys I sat in my office, tomorrow's the day to get to work. And much like the day after someone's wedding, you want to wake up every day and not hope that your decision made you right. You want your ability, your process, and your work to make your decision a right decision. And that's what we have in front of us right now at the University of St. Thomas. So grateful for all of you. If I don't get a chance to see you individually, happy holidays, Merry Christmas, and God's blessings to all of your friends and family, and roll Toms.